All right, every so often, Gail Dines and Dawn Hawkins are both the kind of people that you really think that they can't sink any lower than they normally do, or they have in the past. They just somehow their tactics and their techniques and their lies and their bullshit just can't get any more heinous and any more disgusting and any more sleazy than it already is. Well, they have both together surpassed even my expectations. Believe it or not, both Gail Dines and Dawn Hawkins are now on the attack after BDSM fetish porn, saying, I'm not kidding, that it is torture in violation of international torture laws. I've been reaching out to various friends and associates of mine within the local BDSM community to see if any of them will be willing to appear on camera and discuss their feelings about this, and men and women, and discuss their personal experiences with BDSM and that sort of thing, and why this is such complete malarkey. But for the time being, I'm going to, in the interest of rapid response, do this video responding to the claims that these two clowns are actually making. Dawn, just a little point of advice: clenching your jaw in anger every time you sit down to make a video says a lot about what's actually going on internally with you. Just something to be aware of.
I was never going to address the 50 Shades of Grey book just because I thought it was so ridiculous and couldn't believe that so many women would buy into the idea that torture is pleasurable and can be sexually gratifying.
Dawn, I really do want to get to the meat and potatoes of this video. I really do, but just another little piece of advice: when you start talking about what goes on in 50 Shades of Grey, it really doesn't look good when you start breathing deeply and staring off into space wistfully. It doesn't convey the right message. That's all I'm saying.
But now that mainstream media has accepted this and is working to normalize this domestic violence, and particularly violence against women, I thought I should just say a couple of things.
This is what we're going to be re-emphasizing throughout this video, is that BDSM and fetish sex and kinky stuff like that is not domestic violence. It's not domestic violence if the two people involved are consenting for it to happen and they have established boundaries that they do not cross.
Interestingly, this week, Oprah, on her network OWN, debuted a show in which they talk about how glamorous sadomasochism and BDSM lifestyle is, with Lisa Ling. She was the reporter. I think it's interesting. It's genius that someone came up with this idea that in order to indoctrinate our country into accepting the glamorization of violence, all they needed to do was get Oprah on board, and Oprah caved in and joined, and now here she is, one of the most trusted leaders among American women, from her soapbox saying we should just accept, try to understand, and maybe even explore this lifestyle. So what is sadomasochism and BDSM? It's violence, it's torture, it's inflicting pain, it's slavery, it's tying people up, it's urination, it's beating, it's spitting on them. It's treating them without any kind of dignity.
BDSM is a umbrella term that doesn't necessarily mean that all of those things she's describing, or any of them at all, are involved. You can have bondage without sadomasochism. You can have S&M without bondage. Bondage simply means a person is being physically restrained. That is it. In sexuality, if two partners do something as simple as put on handcuffs or tie each other to the bed, that kind of thing, that's bondage. That is all it is. Anything above and beyond that is what people are experimenting with or trying out in the realm of bondage. Sadomasochism refers to the nature of the relationship between two people. One person is a dominant, one person is a sub or a submissive, and that's all that means. All of the ritualistic practices that go into these things are simply outgrowths of how they choose to express those relationships. And it is not treating someone with no dignity whatsoever. It is intended to represent trust between two people. Trust, on the one hand, that the dominant person, respects and understands the boundaries of the submissive and will not cross those boundaries, and trust on the part of the submissive to be honest and open with their dom so that the dom knows exactly what is and is not acceptable. The example I give people: if you have ever done a trust fall, a trust fall where somebody, like in a team building exercise, somebody falls backwards and trusts you to catch them, that is sadomasochism. You have committed an act of S&M right there. That's a master-slave relationship. You are putting your total trust in that person to catch you. And you think about it. What would it say about the person what would it say about the person who is doing the catching if they let that person that's falling towards them just hit the floor? What would it say about them? Probably that they're cowardly, irresponsible, asinine, annoying, stupid, all of those things. And that is what is reflected in a dom that does not respect the boundaries or the limitations of their submissive, or does not pay 100% attention to the needs desires, and interests of their submissive. It is a cyclical, even-handed relationship, and just because two people are playing different parts within the relationship does not mean that they don't respect each other. It does not mean that they don't acknowledge dignity between each other. They have their specific personal reasons for partaking in that activity. And your inability to understand that does not mean that they are being mistreated in some way.
Kink, which is the most popular website out there for sadomasochism and BDSM, they advertise that girls are pulled in and out of cages, their tongues are clamped, their bodies are pinned, and their arms and legs are strapped. They claim to employ contraptions used in countries such as China for torture, as well as machines, water, metal, wood, electrodes, hooks, needles, and urination, all for the sexual persecution of women and young teenage girls. The dictionary reads that the definition of sadism.
I don't know what she's reading from, but it's not anything on kink.com. Kink.com, if you own the kink.com website, they have a values section which outlines their workplace ethics as well as their model rights and the rules that directors have to follow in explicit and excruciating detail. It also has a blog page which is devoted to constructive and intelligent, thoughtful communication with the models, interviews, and that sort of thing. So whatever she is reading is complete and utter malarkey. And I know people are going to want to write in and say, well, you don't know that the people at Kink are upholding those rules and regulations. They could just be saying that and doing something else. And first of all, I'm not going to go into considerable depth, but from a professional standpoint, I do know that kink.com upholds those rules very strictly, and they are celebrated within the industry for how well they treat their models and everyone else involved. That said, let's set that aside and just say, yeah, it's within the realm of possibility that you're being lied to, and it's actually every bit as horrible as you say it is. but there's two things to that. One, we're talking about how they're presenting themselves, and I don't know what Dawn is reading, but that's not how kink.com presents itself. And then, secondly, just because something is within the realm of possibility doesn't lend any credence to that being what's actually going on. It's within the realm of possibility that everything they said in X-Files is true, and our government sold us out to the space aliens in the mid-70s and are slowly preparing us for the aliens to take over. That's within the realm of possibility. Doesn't mean it's true.
Is sexual gratification gained through causing pain or degradation to others? It's any enjoyment of extreme cruelty. And that masochism is the condition in which sexual gratification depends on suffering, physical pain, and humiliation. What creates a desire in any human being that they would want to be abused in such a way? These people have serious problems. It's not normal. It's not healthy. Most of the time, they've been deeply hurt in their lives, and this is their way of acting it out.
Well, all of that is irrelevant, Dawn, because you do not have the right to decide what is and is not proper to other people's existence. I think that I am not simply saying this to be outrageous. I genuinely think it is unhealthy. I think it is truly, deeply unhealthy, truly sick to build your life and your value system around the idea that a guy got nailed by his hands and feet to a cross some 2,000 years ago, bled to death, died an absolutely disgusting, horrible death on the cross, and then turn around and say, this inspires me, this is beautiful, this is a good thing, this is what I want to live my life by. That, to me, is infinitely more disgusting and morbid and haunted and sick than anything that goes on the kink.com website. I mean, you're essentially worshiping snuff. And so that's disgusting to me. That really bothers me. But guess what? Unlike you, I acknowledge your right to participate in things that I think are completely batshit crazy. Because that's your right. So if we on this side can respect your rights, then you need to respect our rights. Because rights are not granted exclusively to one group that has a wider range of societal acceptance than another. We don't take away people's rights because what they're doing is not normal. So at this point, it gets to a certain point where rather than trying to reason with these people, you just have to flat out, balls out say, you know what? You don't have the right to take our rights away just because you don't understand why we would choose, or we on this side would choose to do things you don't understand. You don't have the right to take that away from us just because you are too pig-headed ignorant to accept that there are people with a different worldview than your own.
And should we then normalize it? No, we shouldn't normalize it. And then on top of that, I just want to point out that the DSM, which is the manual that psychologists and therapists use to diagnose people with mental disorders, the DSM states that sadism and masochism are both mental disorders. And if you're struggling with these urges, you have a problem and you need to get help.
Dawn, if you are going to cite sources, you need to be very aware of what is actually in them. If you all would, please join me on the link below to the DSM-5.org entry on the criteria for diagnosing masochism, sexual masochism. So, scroll down, if you would please, 6 pages to the section titled Incidents of Masochistic Behavior in the Community. Mosier and Levitt, 1987, reported that general population surveys had not established the proportion of the general population that identified as S&M, and noted that it was not clear if any specific behaviors could be classified as S&M specifically. However, S&M behaviors appeared to be fairly common. Kinsey, Pomeroy, Martin, and Gebhard, 1953, page 678, reported that 26% of females and 26% of males reported a definite and or frequent erotic response to being bitten. Hunt, 1974, in a survey of sexual behavior in the United States involving 2,026 respondents in 26 cities, found that 4.8% of males and 2.1% of females reported ever having obtained sexual pleasure from inflicting pain, and 2.5% of males and 4.6% of females from receiving pain. A recent Australian study, Richters, Grulich, DeVieser, Smith, and Rissell, 2003, utilizing a large telephone survey, reported that 2% of men and 1.4% of women reported that in the preceding 12 months they had been involved in bondage and discipline, sadomasochism, or dominance and submission. In another article, Richters, DeVeister, Rissell, Grulich, and Smith, 2008, concluded that BDSM, referring to bondage and discipline, sadomasochism, or dominance and submission, was simply a sexual interest and not a pathological symptom of past abuse or of difficulty with normal sex. Very important, Dawn, because the DSM V, if you had bothered to actually read it, you would have found that they understand that the kinky fetish BDSM play that goes on among the people in that lifestyle is not what they're on the lookout for. They are on the lookout for people who genuinely derive sexual pleasure from inflicting actual pain, actual misery, actual suffering on other people, and people who genuinely wish to be harmed. They understand people who derive sexual pleasure from being actually genuinely harmed in some way. They understand the difference between consensual sex play among consenting adults and things that are mental disorders. And the reason they are the ones who understand that difference is because they are the ones who are qualified to figure out what is and is not psychologically sound in the human mind. Now, the DSM, psychiatrists, there was a time when feelings of transgender, gender dysphoria, or homosexuality, homosexual tendencies were considered to be mental disorders. And they are not anymore, because our understanding of human nature and our willingness to look at society above and beyond the mere fact of social prejudices and that sort of thing, to look at the human mind above and beyond social prejudices, continues to evolve. So, and incidentally, me saying that they are qualified is not the appeal to authority fallacy, because they actually are qualified, and as you can see, they actually do observe correct academic criteria for establishing their conclusions.
In addition to that, the UN has a treaty that the United States signed, we have agreed to it, that states that any kind of torture like this that is usually happening in sadomasochism and BDSM activity is illegal, even if one is consenting to do this. It's illegal.
This current attack is a coordinated effort between the porn harms people and the academic antis, such as Gail Dines and that sort of thing, because this video and Gail's article came out on almost exactly the same day. So Gail is going to cite specific actual laws that they are saying BDSM participants are in violation of. So we'll address that then.
And yet here we have Oprah, through her network, bringing millions of women into this fold that they should just accept this kind of violence.
This is why it helps to have a worldview that is wider than just whatever fits into your little authoritarian cult. This is why it's good to know about history, about the way history has progressed and will continue to progress, and most likely. This is why it is good to know these things. See, I was in junior high and part of high school in Mississippi. This was in the mid 90s to the early 2000s. Right there. That was during a really big social push towards mainstream acceptance of homosexuality. And in Dumbfuckistan, where I lived, that was something that had the conservative, uptight, right-wing, asshole preacher types just really pissed off. And so you go back, if you went back about 10 to 15 years in Mississippi, you would have heard a bunch of preachers pretend this computer manual is a Bible. You'd have heard preachers going, "There's people on the TV telling you it's okay to fuck in the butt. What are you going to do about that? Are you just going to sit there and tolerate it? The Lord said you can't fuck in the butt. And there's men with their pee-pees in the wrong hole right now. And we're supposed to just sit here and take that because they said it's okay on MTV. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't want my country to go that way." My neighbors just love me. Anyway, the point being that throughout the ages, there has been one step of social progress after another towards people accepting and tolerating the differences of others and accepting and exploring new ideas. And every time those steps have been taken, idiots like you, authoritarian idiots like you, the people who walked around during the Dark Ages flagellating themselves in public, those people have decided that this thing, whatever it is that we are tolerating within society, that is new, this new thing is going to be what finally destroys society. Society's going to collapse. Go back through the ages of American history alone. It's going to be homosexuality. It's going to be heavy metal music. It's going to be rap. It's going to be video games. It's going to be rock and roll music. It's going to be Satanism and witchcraft and paganism and Wicca. It's going to be Harry Potter. It's going to be Marilyn Manson. It's going to be liberalism. It's going to be this. It's going to be hippies. It's going to be this and that and all these things. And every time all the way back into like McCarthyism and the communist panic, the Red Scare and all this garbage, all the way back, time and time again, all the way back to the freeing of slaves, of allowing interracial marriage, every time that society has moved in favor of respecting civil liberties and being open to new ideas, crazy batshit people like you have said, "Oh no, the sky is falling. This is it. The grand poobah in the sky is going to rain down upon us and destroy everything if we allow this bizarre thing to occur." I mean, it's satirized wonderfully in the musical The Music Man, where he is drumming up business by scaring everybody with the prospect of a single pool table arriving in town. And so, throughout history, people like you have been saying that acceptance of X concept that is built principally around the acceptance of other people's civil liberties is going to bring about the downfall of society. And time again, it does not. And I know, Dawn, I know you want to say, "Oh yeah, all of that turned out to be okay. But this is the real deal. This is what we really need to focus on. This is what we really need to just get rid of. This is the real danger. And 10 years from now, people are going to be talking again about what bullshit it was that people were worried about this in the first place. All this is, Dawn, is a sociological doomsday prophecy. Doomsday prophecies have been going back thousands of years. For thousands and thousands of years, people have been believing in doomsday prophecies. The end is near. Repent. Everything, the sky is falling. This time we know for sure. This time we're certain that it's going to happen. This time all of the stars have aligned. All of the other things, Y2K and the Harold Camping and 2012 and every other ridiculous doomsday prediction that is come and gone. All of those things, all of those doomsday predictions were obviously bullshit, but this one's real. That is all this is, Dawn. It is a sociological doomsday prophecy. And the real threat, the real danger to freedom and to society is that people like you will be taken seriously. I mean, think about it. Think. When you have a headache with pictures. Anyway, think about it. When the 2012 thing was big and everybody was right up to the last couple of months before December 21st, 2012, the federal government via NASA put out an FAQ responding to, debunking, and putting to rest all of the bizarre, ridiculous, outrageous claims that people were making, which was a very good idea, because when there is literally nothing to worry about, it's important to explain to the crazies out there who will worry about anything at the drop of a hat why there's nothing to worry about. Now, what if the government had said, well, you know what, even though there isn't anything to worry about and the world's not coming to an end and every single shred of observable science agrees that there is nothing that's going to happen special that's going to happen on December 21st, 2012, let's go ahead and put out end-of-the-world survival tips just in case. What do you think would have happened if the government actually came out and said, here are the survival tips? The way Americans go batshit crazy at the drop of a hat, what do you think would have happened? Aside from just, Alex Jones just hearing that and suddenly painting his entire office in semen, that is the danger. That the government is actually going to get behind you people and start humoring you people and start modifying the world to fit your delusions.
I can't stop thinking about the fact that for now 20 plus years, especially men, have been getting a regular diet of hardcore pornography. It's not pictures of bare-breasted women that they're looking at anymore. The mainstream pornography today is extremely violent against women. It shows women tied up, being treated like animals and objects. Much of it is rape-themed pornography. And this is what men have been looking at now for years. They've deviated from the Playboy topless images to images of violence against women. And we also know from a lot of research that regular users of pornography often want to act out what they're viewing in pornography in real life. And
no, you don't have that evidence. You've never had that evidence. And I, along with my fellow skeptics and rational responders in this area, have gone to great lengths to debunk the garbage that you trot out as evidence or the legitimate studies that you manipulate to try to say things that they're not actually saying, like what you did with the DSM earlier. So To those just tuning in, I've done plenty of videos on porn harms alone, as well as many other moral respondents, or moral majority culture war assholes, and that's all there. Suffice to say, that which can be asserted without evidence can also be dismissed without evidence.
So, I mean, the fact that men now have been getting this regular diet of hardcore violent pornography, they want to act out what they're doing, and now finally women are on board because 50 Shades of Grey makes it seem cool to be dominated by a man, to be tied up, to be treated like you're an object. Oprah and Lisa Ling make it seem cool to be abused violently. I can't believe that. It's so genius, whoever came up with this idea, to get mainstream society to accept this kind of behavior. As women, we fought for over 50 years for the rights to be treated as equals, to not be emotionally and physically abused, and yet here we are giving all of those rights up. So many women are buying into this, and
people are not giving up those rights because they are choosing to live in ways that you don't approve of. The fact that they are able to make the choice is where the equal rights and the observation of equal rights are observed, not in the choices themselves.
Not only are they buying into the fact that it's okay to be treated this way, but they're engaging now in treating others and treating men and other women this way too. They're engaging in executing the abuse. I hope that some of you can speak up against this and contact Oprah, contact the OWN network,
and congratulate them for having the courage and the progressive foresight to stand up to people, idiotic, prejudiced, bigoted, short-sighted fools like Dawn Hawkins and Gail Dines, who we will address presently. All right, so Gail's article is on Counterpunch, of course, what I can only describe as her absolute favorite website for spewing whatever ridiculous garbage is crawled up her ass this week. So, she says, celebrities have been speaking out against the movie Zero Dark 30 because of its favorable portrayal of torture used in pursuit of Osama bin Laden. Some have even risked their membership in the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. I wish these celebrities were equally outraged by a documentary that just premiered at Sundance and celebrates the actual, not simulated torture of women. Past experience tells me not to hold my breath. Okay, the next paragraph goes right into it's about James Franco's documentary about Kink.com, which is where all this garbage is spewing from. And she says, Kink.com, a somewhat niche company that specializes in the type of porn that would be right at home in Abu Ghraib. Okay, now, the reason, Gail, that the grown-ups are upset about Zero Dark 30 and not Kink.com is because they understand that Zero Dark 30 was a true story about the use of torture in violation of international law. And the reason they're not upset about Kink.com is because they understand the concept of kinky, fetish, BDSM sex, and they know that the two are not one and the same. One is a heinous violation of human rights. The other is people who get off on weird shit that a lot of people don't understand. She goes on to say, a bit of fantasy never hurt anyone, right? Because fantasy happens in the head, not in the real world, right? Tell this to the women and a few men on the Kink.com website whose bodies are displayed in agonizing contortions that would not be out of place in the Spanish Inquisition. Stretched out on racks, hogtied, urine squirting in their mouths, and suspended from the ceiling while attached to electrodes, including ones inserted in their vaginas. I love that statement. I just love the grammatic failing of that statement that made it sound like men men are having electrodes inserted in their vaginas. Anyway, earlier I talked about the values on the values section of kink.com. So let's take a look at the values section. Now, if you will go to kink.com/k/shooting_rules.jsp, you will find a very thorough discussion of the rules that the directors are expected to observe, including limitations on content. Scat, bleeding, needles, and vomiting are not permitted. If someone is grazed inadvertently and the bleeding is minimal, that's okay. Then they have specific rules covering pissing, squirting, and coming. And for pissing, they don't allow it in their scenes, save for they do have a website called pissing.com, which is devoted entirely to urine fetish. It's not allowed in the rest of their scenes, and so people who choose to take part in the pissing scenes know what they're getting into. There are specific limits involved and specific coverage and specific discussions of what's involved. Now, Gail goes on to say finally, taking a cue from Dick Cheney's playbook, women are submerged into a tank of water until they start to cough and choke. As I watched these scenes, the term feel good couldn't have been further from my mind. Once again, your research falls flat, Gail. We don't know what scenes you watch. We don't know how many of them you watch. We don't know how you determine that those scenes are typical of what occurs in kink.com, etc. We just know you watched some scenes and didn't like what you saw, which again, that falls right into the realm of tough shit. It's not your business to determine what's right for other people. And then there are matters covering model safety with regards to breath play, choking, marking, and circulation. Now, if you will direct your attention to point 26, breath play. Breath play is permitted, however, no forced breath play will continue for more than 30 seconds. This includes dunking in water, plastic bags over someone's head, and choking that inhibits breathing. Directors must get approval from Peter Ackworth before doing dunking scenes in order to verify that appropriate training has been taken. In other words, there is a very, very obvious and fine line between the so-called enhanced interrogation techniques and what goes on at kink.com. They have very specific boundaries, and one of the most specific of all boundaries is that the models can stop the scene at any time. And we in the grown-up world understand the difference between consent and non-consent. The people who are being tortured at Abu Ghraib don't have the right to decide what they want to do. They don't have the right to stop the interrogation and leave whenever they want. They're not paid for their participation. They do not consent. That's the big difference. Now, let me give you a very intentionally condescending example that is abundantly obvious to everyone else. If you were to walk up on the street, or if a man walks up to another man on the street and punches him in the face, the man who threw that punch is guilty of assault. That is a crime. That is illegal. However, if those two men put on boxing gloves and get in a boxing ring and start fighting, neither one of them is guilty of assault. There's not of assault and battery or anything of the sort, so long as they both want to be a part of what's going on. And everybody, it seems, generally understands that. You get in the boxing ring and you start punching each other, and that is totally acceptable because that is consensual. If somebody, I keep saying if a man, because if I say you, Gail would not be physically capable of doing any of these things. But if a man were to go and tackle another man and take what he was holding in his hand away from him and run off with it, that would be assault, battery, and theft, and that's illegal. But if they get in a football field and they tackle each other, grab the football, and run away, that's not illegal, because they are choosing to participate in that. And the fact that there is an element of physical harm that they both agree to participate in within certain boundaries, that is what makes what they're doing okay. So you may not like that there's people out there consenting to participate in sexual practices that make you uncomfortable, but that does not give you the right to take their rights away. And it does not mean that simply because there is a similarity between what they are doing and things that are done against people's will in genuine actual torture scenarios, that does not mean that there is any correlation in any way, shape, or form. That does not mean that the consensual act is somehow illegal or somehow comparable to what's going on over here. And this is why what I'm going to talk about in a sec, closing it out, is the response that Gail has been getting to this ridiculous, idiotic article from people like Mark Kearns over at AVN, which go check out his article. I'm reluctant to link to any porn industry websites from here, obviously, because the YouTube system may flag it. But go check out Mark Kearns' article on this topic on avn.com. It was a fairly recent article, and he lays into this beautifully. All right. Then she gets into, this is the statement that burns me. This really pisses me off. I mean, this is disgusting in the extreme. She says, Kink.com is in violation of the United Nations Convention Against Torture. The International Council for Rehabilitation of Torture Victims states, quote, some of the most common methods of physical torture include beating, electric shock, stretching, submersion, suffocation, burns, rape, and sexual assault, close quote. These are the very acts showcased on the Kink.com website. They are not mere simulations. Yes, actually, if you will go to the aforementioned rules and regulations on their website, they do have specific regulations outlining each of those activities, and any act that depicts any kind of abduction or sexual assault of any kind has to carry a very distinct understanding from all of the models involved that it was just done for performance sake, and so that is covered on their website. As far as beating, electric shock, stretching, submersion, suffocation, they don't say anything about burns, but as far as for the rest, they have specific rules that they have to follow on the Kink.com website to govern those activities, and they are done within the context of absolute consent in a situation that can be stopped at any time by any participant involved, as well as any member of the production crew that is concerned about the well-being of the people involved. Now, let's have a look at the Convention Against Torture link in the crotch bar. All right, after a short preface, it goes into Article 1 defining torture as, for the purposes of this convention, the term torture means any act by which severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted on a person for such purposes as obtaining from him or a third person information or a confession, punishing him for an act he or a third person has committed or is suspected of having committed, or intimidating or coercing him or a third person, or for any reason based on discrimination of any kind, when such pain or suffering is inflicted by or at the instigation of or with the consent or acquiescence of a public official or other person acting in an official capacity. It does not include pain or suffering arising only from, inherent in, or incidental to lawful sanctions. This article is without prejudice to any international instrument or national legislation which may contain provisions of wider application. If you've already read Mark Kearns' excellent article, you know that this what goes on at kink.com does not fit the definition of torture in this article. They are not trying to extract a confession. They are not punishing anybody for actions they have committed or suspected of having committed, except within the confines of the fictional stories that the characters are acting out and the consensual scenarios and narratives that they are participating in. And no, that is not punishment as it is defined in this article. This article is concerned with what happens in the real world, not what actors portray anyway. Or intimidating or coercing a third person, that's not what goes on at kink. Or for any reason based on discrimination of any kind when pain or suffering is inflicted by or at the instigation or with the consent or acquiescence of a public official or other person acting in an official capacity. Okay. So I know at this point Gail and her ilk are going to want to say, oh, yes, this is discrimination. They said the magic word discrimination, and we can apply that to mean we can apply that to mean that pornographers are trying to discriminate and cause suffering among women. So that's what makes it. No, that's not what they're talking about. First of all, or most importantly, they're talking about pain or suffering that is inflicted by or at the instigation of or with the consent or acquiescence of a public official or a person acting in an official capacity. This is a document which governs how members of the government, public servants, law enforcement persons, military persons, congressmen, senators, the president, people who work for the government have to conduct themselves, not what goes on among private citizens. Then there is this additional language that says it does not include pain or suffering arising only from, inherent in, or incidental to lawful sanctions. Well, I would imagine that what is implied by that is, for example, if a person is detained by the police or is interrogated using non-torturous methods, then obviously that doesn't apply. That's within the bounds of the law. But ultimately, that statement right there could easily be expanded to say that this doesn't apply to what goes on consensually among private citizens. There is nothing in here about sexual gratification. There is, Dawn said that this specifically overruled individual consent. It does not. So I would invite anyone to thoroughly examine the language in this article. But for Gail to say this is hilarious and fallacious and wrong and misinformed. There are people who, if they said something like that, like if Ann Coulter said it, or Alex Jones or Glenn Beck or someone like that said it, I would say, oh, well, that's either they're just nuts or they're just saying that to get a response. Ann Coulter would say things like that to get a response. And with Gail, though, she really and truly is behind the idea that this is in violation of international law and the Convention Against Torture. You have literally no idea what you're talking about, Gail. None whatsoever. Now, moving on to the subject of what was said by the International Council for Rehabilitation for Torture Victims. Two observations need to be made. The first one, some of the most common methods of physical torture include beating, electric shock, stretching, submersion, suffocation, burns, rape, and sexual assault. Okay, this is something that I've been trying to explain to another YouTube user. Not another YouTube user, to a YouTube user, another anti-porn voice, and on a semi-related concept. But anyway, just to show that there's an ongoing failure of logic or a common failure of logic here. Just because those are methods of torture doesn't mean that doing those things, or in the case of rape and sexual assault, acting them out on kink.com is somehow is in and of itself torture. Earlier we were talking about how just because people are punching each other doesn't mean it's a crime if it's done in a boxing ring. There is a context under which these things can legally occur. And rape and sexual assault are not occurring at kink.com because you cannot rape the willing. And the other thing that needs to be observed is their statements on the International Council for Rehabilitation for Torture Victims of what is torture. So, okay, come down to www.irct.org/what-is-torture/defining-torture.aspx. Who are the perpetrators? By definition, torture is inflicted by or at the instigation of or with the consent or acquiescence of a public official or other person acting in an official capacity. Those most likely to be involved in torture include persons such as prison officers, detention staff, the police, the military, paramilitary forces, state-controlled contra-guerrilla forces, but perpetrators may also include health professionals, legal professionals, co-detainees acting with the approval or on the orders of public officials, death squads. In the context of armed conflicts, torture and other forms of ill treatment could also be inflicted by opposition forces, the general population in a civil war situation. So, once again, torture requires the involvement of a public official or the consent or acquiescence. So, I know what they're going to try to say in response to that, which is, oh, well, then all of the police and the local authorities and the local government around that surround kink and their website and their facilities and everything, it's torture because all of those people are acquiescing to allow for it to happen, so therefore it's torture. No, it's not. No, it's not. The government allowing people to observe their right to freely and peacefully assemble is not their acquiescence to torture. And if you think that it is, try bringing charges against local government officials for acquiescing to the use of torture and see how far you actually get with that, because at that point you will be subject to interacting with people who are actually trained in and understand the law as it stands. She goes on to say, the usual defense of kink.com is that the women signed a contract and hence agreed to the acts. But as attorney Wendy Murphy of the New England School of Law writes, torture doctrine is not hampered by concerns about consent because, as a matter of law and policy, one cannot consent to torture. I know this is not what is meant by the statement, but it is the reality of the statement, which is that consent there is actually being treated as an absolute. If the person is consenting to what is happening, then what is happening to them is not torture. And that is why what happens on kink.com is not torture. So Gail goes on to say, and anyway, what does meaningful and informed consent mean to the women subjected to these degrading and painful tortures, which are designed to break the body and spirit? Even the intelligence services acknowledge that information gained from coercive methods is unreliable. Pay very, very close attention to that statement. She has just said that what she is actually saying here, that kink.com is using torture to get consent from the women involved. And that is a very, very crucial statement. I just want to draw attention to that. That is not, she is not coming right out and saying that that's what they're doing. But when she says that, when she says right there in the breath about consent that intelligence services acknowledge that information gained from coercive methods is unreliable, she is stating that they are using torture to get the consent. And I hope that everybody will pay attention to that, especially the people at kink.com. She goes on to say, The women, like others who enter porn, are young and often do not know the full extent of what will happen on the set and cannot anticipate the lasting psychological and emotional effects. Well, there is extensive documented evidence of what's going to happen on the set, Gail, and believe it or not all young women are these naive little victims that you think they are. So, and believe it or not, there are people who are actually into it. And then she goes on to say the ultimate lie of kink.com is that it claims to do candid interviews with the women at the end of the scene so they can show just how much they enjoyed the sex. This is like asking sweatshop laborers to talk about how happy they were to be working for some multinational corporation as the CEO films the interview. Extreme straw man argument, Gail. That's not what goes on in the interviews. Let's refer back to the kink.com director agreements, to outline what goes on in those interviews and why and how. All right, in the section on production, interview requirements, general interview rules, pre-shoot and post-shoot interviews are required for any paid model who participates in a submissive in a BDSM or abduction scene. The interviews cannot be part of a scene, and the model cannot be in character or in bondage. The model must be allowed to speak in their own words and not prompted to answer yes or no questions. Interviews are not required for third-party content. Pre-shoot interview. If a shoot involves BDSM, safe words must be established and confirmed by the model in the interview. A nonverbal safe word must be established if they will be gagged or otherwise unable to speak during the shoot. If an abduction scene is planned, it must be established that the abduction is completely consensual and simulated. There cannot be dialogue suggesting that the model is underage. You cannot ask the model to describe sexual acts they participated in while they were underage, but you can ask them about their first or early sexual experiences. These interview requirements must be addressed at the very beginning of the interview. Establish the safe words, then address the abduction scenario if applicable. Post-shoot interview. The model must have clearly recovered from the shoot. It must be clear that the model consented to what happened. The interview must be at least 1 minute long. The model must be asked about their favorite parts and what they liked and didn't like. And then it goes on to describe how interviews must be structured pertaining to ongoing scenes and series that are part of a larger story. Then it goes on to a further section on the interviews. The pre-shoot interview must be placed at the beginning of the shoot and the post-shoot interview at the end, unless the sub is male, in which case both interviews can be placed at the end. I don't know why. If an update is part of one master meaning production, shoot, every update after the first update may place both interviews at the end, but the first update cannot. The other option is to place the opening interview at the beginning of the first update and the closing interview at the end of the last update, in which case every update except for the first has to have the text "to be continued from shoot ID preceding update" at the beginning. Every has text continued from anyway. Every update except for the last has to have the text "to be continued" at the end. If a shoot is part of a series, a sequence of shoots from a continuing story, and it goes on, you can read that if the technical information if you want to read it. So the idea that they just got they were just videotaped to talk about how much they like being fucked or like the sex is a straw man. It is completely wrong. And the analogy to sweatshop labor is invalid. All right, so to show you what the post-interview sounds like, this is from the kink site whippedass.com. It's the porn star Felony and Bobby Starr and one other. But anyway, this will give you an idea of what those interviews actually sound like.
So, how was your first time being domed by two girls?
It was fabulous.
Yeah.
It's definitely different when you're being domed by one. You're not necessarily expecting the other one to come from behind you, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's definitely different, but I love it.
Element of surprise.
Exactly.
What was your favorite part?
My favorite part, I have to say, when you're fucking me in the ass, and she had something on my pussy. Oh my god.
Oh, the magic wand.
Oh my god.
I don't call it magic for no reason.
I've had, the orgasm. Oh, wow. And it wasn't like
Crushed my hand in between the bar and your leg at one point. I'm like, okay, give it back.
I'm sorry.
It's all good.
It was just, that just means it felt really good.
Oh, I don't doubt it. Was there anything that you didn't like? Anything that you wouldn't want to do again?
I think I'm not really hard.
Other than the part where I cropped your pussy, really.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I have to say that'd probably be the only one. You know, I loved it when you guys just smothered my face with your pussy. Mm-hmm. And that's the first time I've ever been smothered with an asshole. You know, an ass on my face. Oh my god. It just, like, my face literally fits inside someone's ass. It was great. I loved it. And then I have to admit, I liked giving you motorboats all over your pussy and ass. That was one of my favorite parts.
Cool. So, how did your pain tolerance hold up this time around?
This time around, it was definitely painful. There's this one device that I haven't used on myself before. Damn. Ouch.
Which one was it?
Ouch. Oh, no, I know that it was the last scene when my legs were tied up to my legs like this, and you were just on my calves right here.
Oh, the crop. Right.
Is that what that was?
The crop.
Oh my gosh.
Stings.
Yeah, that's a stinger.
So on a scale from 1 to 10, where do you think we ended up on your pain tolerance?
I think you definitely hit it with the 10.
All right. Yeah. Right on.
That crop is definitely, it just jumps the scale.
Yep.
Definitely.
Was there anything, as far as pain goes, that you felt pleasure from that you would have liked more that we didn't do enough of?
Fucking my ass.
All right. So all in all, it's good shoot?
Yeah, all in all, it's a great shoot.
And you'll work the two of us again?
Most definitely. You guys are fun.
All right. All right, well, say bye to the members. And
bye.
See you next time. Bye.
All right, so throughout that interview, they talked about what she liked, what she didn't like. It was pleasant. It was conversational. The questions were open-ended. They were not yes-no questions. She was not led to give specific responses. She was allowed to speak at length, and she did not have to be encouraged to expound at length on what happened. None of the signs of somebody being forced or coerced to say something are present, and a genuine sense of enjoyment and a genuine pleasant tone is evident in that interview. Now, that's, go look at the material on kink.com and their various affiliate websites and everything if you need to look into it yourself. But the idea of that interview, as Gail describes it, is a complete straw man. She concludes the article saying, if Sundance were premiering a film about Iraqis, African Americans, Jews, or any other group, or any group other than women being tortured, would they be able to call it a feel-good documentary? Well, once again, that is complete and total horse shit, because the point is it's not supposed to be a feel-good documentary about torturing women. That is not the point. And once again, Gail is trying to just assume that there's this inherent misogyny at work. She goes on to say, if you want to understand how the pornographers, and in this case, Sundance and James Franco, get away with this travesty, then you need to look no further than Andrew Edmond himself, a pornographer, but one who tells the truth. In a 2000 interview with Brandweek, Edmond, president and CEO of Flying Crocodile, a $20 million internet pornography business, stated that those outside the industry don't understand how porn works because a lot of people get distracted by the sex. Okay, first of all, what he was referring to, and this is covered in my original series on Gail Dines and her original speech at the, I believe it's the 2007 Anti-Porn Week at Wheelock College. What Andrew Edmond is referring to is the business aspect of the porn industry, that the business aspect operates just like any other capitalist enterprise. And so this phrase, understand how porn works, is an ambient statement that she can twist to say whatever she means. The only thing she quotes is, quote, a lot of people get distracted by the sex. There's no close quote, but that's the rest is obviously her speaking when she says, to that he could add that they could also get distracted from the pain and anguish on the women's faces as they're being debased, abused, and dehumanized. Where are the celebrities speaking out against this? Well, the reason they're not speaking out against it, Gail, is because everybody else actually understands that this is not torture. It's just something fun that people are interested in and enjoy, and your lack of understanding of that does not give you the right to take other people's rights away. So, what was Gail's response to Mark Kearns' article? Well, it's surprising that she actually responded at all. She usually seems to dismiss arguments from men outright, but this isn't much better. Anyway, on her personal Facebook page, and I will stop again to emphasize to anyone who is wondering that what you make publicly available for anybody to see on your personal Facebook page is open to the public for anybody to see and can be freely discussed. Now, anyway, on Friday, last Friday, she said, I am so grateful to the pornographers for helping me to understand that torture is just fantasy and sex play. And here was me thinking that when you dunk someone in water, they could drown. Well, yeah, Gail, they actually have specific rules covering that to make sure that the person doesn't drown, and they have proper training and first aid on hand to make sure that the people's health or the performer's health is looked out for. Or when you beat them, they could get hurt. Yes, that's why they have specific safe words involved to stop the scene, and also specific limitations on what kind of physical contact can occur, and that long-term damage cannot be inflicted on the performers. And when you hog-tie them, you're doing damage to their body. Well, potentially, you could be doing damage to their body, but there are two considerations. One, it's the people are risk-aware, just like when you when you play football or go boxing, you are aware of the potential for physical harm and are willing to endure what may occur, but also they have the right to stop the scene if they don't care for it, and if they don't care for what's happening. And Gail, believe it or not, there are people in this world called contortionists who have the ability to put themselves into odd and unusual positions that most of us would find very difficult. And these people do exist in porn as well. And then she goes on to say, silly me, and thanks to creepy porn user Mark Kearns for explaining to us anti-porn feminists why we have it wrong. Mark Kearns, this is an excellent example of just the standard ad hominem attack that she uses. You want to try to invoke that word creepy in reference to Mark, just so you don't have to respond to what he's saying. Mark Kearns is a writer for Adult Video News, and brings a considerable legal background to his writing. So he is not, as simply as Gail put it, a creepy porn user. That is a pure ad hominem attack. If you were to turn that around on Gail and say something like a fat, ugly feminist or something like that, I'm sure she would be incensed, but she does not grant her opposition the same courtesy. Gail, I know that we who defend porn are just lower than dirt in your mind, but please try to observe the simple rules and the simple, I should say, the general conventions of society that we all observe for pleasant interaction. But it gets even more pathetic because later on Friday she posted this. I love being called a crusader. I am Jewish and the crusaders murdered my people, so a bit hard for me to be one of them. Then again, don't expect the pornography pimps to be the most well-read or thoughtful of thinkers. Their brains are way below their belt. Gail, that is not what is meant by the term crusader, and you know it. They are not referring literally to a person who fought in the Crusades. There is a general term that stems from that, but it is a general term for somebody that is out there. You know what? Let's see what dictionary.com has to say for crusader. Okay, crusade, any of the military expeditions undertaken by the Christians of Europe in the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries for the recovery of Holy Land from the Muslims, any war carried out under a papal sanction, any vigorous, aggressive movement for the defense or advancement of an idea, cause, etc., a crusade against child abuse. The third definition is what they're referring to, and to just kind of fart around and pretend to be offended by something like that is just a bare bones example of how you and your ilk will use simple semantic arguments to try to invoke your political correctness that has allowed you to always get what you want whenever you want it. Sorry, tough shit. Fuck you if you don't like being called a crusader, because you are a crusader, you crusader. And what's funny is she goes on to say, another article, she read an article Friday and said, I just read the so-called debate on the independent website, Go and Vote Against Porn. I am so fucking sick of the mainstream media being cheerleaders for the porn industry. Then she said, forgot to add that I am even more sick of women fronting for the porn industry. Men make porn, men get rich off porn, men jerk off to porn, but they get sellout women, many of whom are themselves making a profit from pimping other women to do their public bidding because they are such fucking cowards. I love how just the sheer venom of all of this just keeps seething from Gail to the point that she can't even present herself in any kind of respectable manner. I mean, she cusses as much or more than I do. Anyway, then 6 hours ago she posted, Robert Rosen, author of Beaver Street and occasional contributor to SPC FB page, just wrote a rather juvenile piece on me in his blog. The pornographers and their cronies are so interesting because they have no concept of activism for social change. They assume that we are all like them in our desire to monetize everything we do. This is a typical capitalist thinking that can't conceive of a world where people act on their desire to make lives better for others. And what he's talking about is that he's talking about how Gail needs the porn industry to make her money. She is a professional advocate against the porn industry. Therefore, the porn industry has to exist for her to make her money. And that is very true. It is indicative of the parasitic nature of what Gail is doing. That is not to say that there is not legitimate activism and legitimate causes taken up against in actual injustice in the world, but it is very obvious, very blatantly obvious, Gail, just how much, when you are so consistently wrong, dishonest, cruel, insulting, underhanded, and sleazy in your techniques, and go around the world raking in dough to preach what can only be described as bigotry, ignorance, prejudice, and fear onto young minds. There is nothing legitimate about what you do. Your academic and professional failings are obvious, observable, empirical, if you will, and well documented. Now, some people may still be listening to all of this and thinking, well, why are you so upset about this? Why is this a new low for Gail and Dawn and everybody like them? Well, because they are now in the practice of leveraging the contempt that most people have for the political practice of torture to accomplish their goals. When they do this, all that they are doing, the only thing they are doing, is making torture, real, actual torture, seem less significant than it actually is. What happens on kink.com is a cartoon compared to actual torture, where people's lives are actually threatened, where they actually suffer irreparable damage to their bodies, where they have no rights, where no amount of begging will make it stop, where no human rights are being observed, where they don't know if they'll ever see the light of day again. That is a profound and bitter and deep, deep insult to the actual victims of actual torture. Now, I'm sorry, but to use those people and their suffering to accomplish the delusional hysteria of your crusade it would be laughable if it was not so unconscionable and so horrible. Now, in closing, a lot of people may not understand why people get into BDSM and why they get into S&M and bondage and all of that and these bizarre sexual practices. Well, for that, I will leave you with the words of Bob Flanagan. This is taken from a documentary called Sick, which was about his life. Bob Flanagan was a BDSM performance artist. He suffered throughout his life from cystic fibrosis, and he used BDSM as a means to cope and deal with the pain and the suffering that he went through as a part of his disease. He used it to be in control of his pain, and it made him, if you watch the documentary, it actually made him an inspiration to a great many people, including those who suffered from cystic fibrosis. So he would do things, the kind of things that kink would never allow. One of the people commenting on Gail's ravings here on her Facebook page implied that kink.com featured things like women having their breasts nailed to or nails driven through their breasts, or broken beer bottles shoved into their vaginas, which neither of those things happen on kink. But they was talking about things like that. And for the record, the only time I have seen nails driven through a woman's breasts was a single image on the website Encyclopedia Dramatica. So anyway, Bob Flanagan was a BDSM performance artist in the extreme. And by that, I mean that if you watch the documentary Sick, there is footage of him nailing his penis to a piece of wood. There is footage in there of him undergoing severe cock and ball torture, of him suspending large weights, heavy weights from his testicles and his penis, and inflicting all sorts of horrible damage on himself. He infamously wrote and published his pain journals, where he wrote about these events as they were happening, as he was experimenting with the limits of pain. There are parts of that book where he actually wrote parts of that while he was sitting there with his penis hammered by a nail into a plank of wood. I'm going to leave you. The section you're going to hear has no objectionable or I shouldn't say objectionable, but no controversial content as far as the visuals, and it is just him reciting a piece that he wrote called Why, and it is meant to explain why he got into BDSM. And obviously it doesn't speak for everybody's experience or why they got into BDSM, but for him, I think it outlines beautifully why, and it gives a thorough explanation as to why any person might come into BDSM and the BDSM subculture. So, take it away, Bob.
Why? Because it feels good, because it gives me an erection, because it makes me come, because I'm sick, because there was so much sickness, because I say fuck the sickness, because I like the attention, because I was alone a lot, because I was different, because kids beat me up on the way to school, because I was humiliated by nuns, because of Christ and the crucifixion, because of porky pagan bondage force-fed by some sinister creep in a black cape, because of stories about children hung by their wrists, burned on the stove, scalded in tubs, because of Mutiny on the Bounty, because of cowboys and Indians, because of Houdini, because of my cousin Cliff, because of the forts we built and the things we did inside them, because of what's inside me, because of my genes, because of my parents, because of doctors and nurses, because they tied me to the crib so I wouldn't hurt myself, because I had time to think, because I had time to hold my penis, because I had awful stomach aches and holding my penis made it feel better, because I felt like I was going to die, because it makes me feel invincible, because it makes me feel triumphant, because I'm a Catholic, because I still love Lent and I still love my penis, and in spite of it all, I have no guilt, because my parents said, be what you want to be, and this is what I want to be, because I'm nothing but a big baby, and I want to stay that way, and I want a mommy forever, even a mean one, especially a mean one, because of all the fairy tale witches and the wicked stepmother and the stepsisters, and how sexy Cinderella was, smudged with soot, doomed to a life of servitude, because of Hansel, locked in the witch's cage until he was fat enough to eat, because of O and how desperately I wanted to be her, because of my dreams, because of the games we played, because I've got an active imagination, because my mother bought me Tinker toys, because hardware stores give me hard-ons, because of hammers, nails, clothespins, wood, padlocks, pulleys, eye bolts, thumbtacks, staple guns, sewing needles, wooden spoons, fishing tackle, chains, metal rulers, rubber tubing, spatulas, rope, twine, C-clamps, S-hooks, razor blades, scissors, tweezers, knives, push pins, 2x4s, ping pong paddles, alligator clips, duct tape, broomsticks, barbecue skewers, bungee cords, sawhorses, soldering irons, because of tool sheds, because of garages, because of basements, because of dungeons, because of the pit and the pendulum, because of the Tower of London, because of the Inquisition, because of the rack, because of the cross, because of the Addams Family Playroom, because of Morticia Addams and her black dress with its octopus legs, because of motherhood, because of Amazons, because of the goddess, because of the moon, because it's in my nature, because it's against nature, because it's nasty, because it's fun, because it flies in the face of all that's normal, whatever that is, because I'm not normal, because I used to think that I was part of some vast experiment and that there was this implant in my penis that made me do these things and allowed them, wherever they were, to monitor my activities. Because I had to take my clothes off and lie inside this giant plastic bag so the doctors could collect my sweat. Because once upon a time I had such a high fever my parents had to strip me naked and wrap me in wet sheets to stop the convulsions. Because my parents loved me even more when I was suffering. Because I was born into a world of suffering. Because surrender is sweet. Because I'm attracted to it. Because I'm addicted to it. Because endorphins in the brain are like a natural kind of heroin. Because I learned to take my medicine. Because I was a big boy for taking it. Because I can take it like a man. Because, as somebody once said, he's got more balls than I do. Because it is an act of courage. Because it does take guts. Because I'm proud of it. Because I can't climb mountains. Because I'm terrible at sports. Because no pain, no gain. Because spare the rod and spoil the child. Because you always hurt the one you love.